Vanessa called me into her office one Tuesday afternoon and bluntly said, "Your menu feels too traditional for the direction I want to take this restaurant." She had barely been in charge of Cloud Marsh Tech for 3 weeks, but already had strong opinions about the dishes I'd been crafting over the last 7 years. My name's Luca Moretti. I'm 43, and I was the executive chef at what used to be called Breerloft Bistro in Providence, Rhode Island. I transformed that quiet neighborhood eatery into one of the East Coast's most respected restaurants, not with flashy tricks or molecular gastronomy, but by cooking food that brought people back to something genuine and familiar. Vanessa kept her eyes glued to her laptop and added, "We need a fresh culinary identity, something that's more Instagrammable, more fusion, more exciting." I didn't protest. I just nodded once and quietly asked when my last day would be. She looked startled by how calmly I accepted it, as if she expected me to bargain or plead. But I don't beg people to see what they're unwilling to. 7 years I'd put my heart and soul into those dishes. 7 years tweaking recipes passed down from my grandmother in Naples, back when I was barely tall enough to peer over the kitchen counter. 7 years curating a menu that made diners close their eyes with the very first bite. Vanessa smiled, relieved. 2 weeks should be enough for the transition. You'll need to hand over detailed recipes for all the signature dishes. Of course, I nodded again, though we both knew I'd never written down any of the authentic recipes. Not the way I really prepared them that night during service. I watched my kitchen crew move like a finely tuned orchestra. Jason on the grill, precise like a metronome. Ellie plating with surgeon-level focus. None of them knew yet that the soul of this place was about to be ripped out. After closing, I sat alone at the bar with a glass of bourbon. The dining room was dark except for the small light above me. My fingers traced the worn bar top where I'd served thousands of customers who'd become friends. The next morning, Thomas, my sous chef for 5 years, caught me packing up my personal knives. "Chef, what's going on?" he asked. I told him about the meeting. His expression shifted. Anger flashed in his eyes. "This restaurant is thriving." "It's her place now," I said, still packing. "But those are your recipes, your dishes. People come here for your food." I just shrugged. Not anymore. Walking to my car that evening, I glanced back at the restaurant's glowing sign. Something twisted in my gut. Not sadness exactly, but something sharper, telling me this story wasn't finished. My grandfather opened the original Moretti's in Naples when he was just 22. I grew up watching him work wonders with simple ingredients: flour, eggs, and whatever fresh veggies he found at the market. Food wasn't fancy in my family. It was honest, full of memories. It was what made people stop and remember what truly mattered. I hadn't come to Providence planning on becoming a chef. I was studying architecture at RISD and washing dishes at night to pay for school. Then one evening, the line cook called in sick, and the owner was desperate. I stepped in. Something clicked. The rhythm of the kitchen felt more right than any drafting table ever had. 6 months later, I dropped out. My father didn't speak to me for a year. I worked my way through 4 kitchens before landing at Breerloft, then a struggling bistro with tired decor and a forgotten menu. The owner, Harold, was ready to shut it down when he gave me full control of the kitchen. "Make food that matters to you," he said. "I've run out of ideas." So I did. I crafted a menu around my grandmother's recipes. The lamb braised 6 hours with rosemary and juniper, the saffron seafood stew my grandfather learned from his mother, the olive oil cake soaked in orange liqueur we served at every family wedding. People noticed, locals first, then food critics, then tourists who read about us online. We weren't trendy. We were timeless. Necessary, Harold sold the place when his wife fell ill and needed money for treatment. I understood. The new owners were a restaurant group who mostly left me alone. "Don't fix what isn't broken," their CEO said. For 3 years, it worked. Until Vanessa took over, she started popping into prep, asking questions that made clear she didn't get restaurants or food. She'd bring friends during service who sent dishes back because they weren't pretty enough for social media. 2 weeks before she fired me, I overheard her on the phone. "We're keeping the name for now, but everything else changes. New concept, new chef, new energy." I should have prepared, should have seen it coming, but part of me refused to believe anyone would tear apart something that worked so well, something people loved. The night before my last day, I cooked every signature dish one final time, tasting each and memorizing the flavors. Not that I needed to. These dishes were in my blood. My final night at Breerloff was quiet. No speeches, no party, just a normal service, though my hands felt heavier with every dish I sent out. After closing, I left my keys on Vanessa's desk with a list of recipes, the official ones for health inspections and line cooks, not the real ones. I drove home to my small apartment, opened a bottle of Barolo I'd been saving, sat on my balcony staring at the city lights, and felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just an empty space where 7 years of my work had lived. The next morning, my phone buzzed with texts from the kitchen staff. Vanessa had brought in a new executive chef, a guy named Kevin from a trendy Boston spot. He was already shaking things up, rearranging the kitchen, talking about elevating the menu. I didn't reply. I just switched off my phone and went for a walk downtown. 3 days later, Thomas showed up at my door, still in his kitchen whites, eyes wild. "It's a disaster," he said, barging past me into my apartment. "Kevin can't recreate anything he's trying, but the dishes are all wrong." "They have the recipes," I told him. Thomas gave me a look. "They have what you wrote down, not how you actually made them." I shrugged and poured him a glass of water. New chef, new restaurant. That's how it goes. "The regulars are noticing Mrs. Carpenter sent back the lamb twice last night, said it wasn't right." Mrs. Carpenter had been coming every Thursday for 5 years, always ordering the lamb, always telling me it reminded her of the year she spent in southern Italy before her husband passed. "They're planning a big relaunch next week," Thomas said. "Food critics, influencers, the whole show. Let me know if you want me to tweak it further." Vanessa called it the Breyer Loft evolution. A strange feeling stirred in my chest, not quite satisfaction, but a kind of recognition, the start of an answer to a question I hadn't fully formed. "You looking for work?" I asked Thomas. He blinked, confused. "What?" I told him about my grandfather's old spot downtown. The building had been empty since he passed, but I still owned it. "Are you thinking about opening your own place?" I hadn't really considered it before, not consciously, but saying it aloud made something clear. 7 years spent building someone else's dream. Maybe it was time to build my own. "Maybe," I said. "You interested?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "Hell yes, and I bet Ellie and Jason would be in too." That night, sleep eluded me. I pulled out my grandfather's old notebook, half-finished recipes, notes on customers. His handwriting was shaky in later years, but his thoughts were clear. Inside the cover he'd written, "The food remembers even when people forget." I traced the words and felt a stirring, not anger toward Vanessa or hunger for revenge, but a pure need to create food that mattered again, food that was truly mine. The week after I left, food bloggers started posting about changes at Breerloft, photos of deconstructed versions of my dishes, foam where sauce should be, tiny portions arranged like abstract art comment sections filled with confused regulars. What happened to the real menu? This isn't what made this place special. I was painting my grandfather's old restaurant space when Vanessa called. First time since I left Luca, her voice smooth. "How are you?" "Fine. We're having transition challenges. I was hoping you might consult to smooth things over." I set down my paint roller. "What challenges?" She hesitated. "Some signature dishes aren't turning out right. Kevin's talented, but customers notice differences." You have the recipes, I repeated. Yes, but nuances seem missing. I almost laughed. Nuances like adjusting lamb seasoning by season, adding more acid to seafood stew when using Gulf shrimp instead of local catch, tweaking olive oil cake bake times on humid days. We can compensate you well, she said, and credit you as consulting chef. I'm busy, I said. Her tone hardened. The relaunch is in 3 days. Critics and investors are coming. I need those dishes right. Then you shouldn't have fired the person who created them. Silence. I'll double your last salary for 2 weeks consulting. No, triple it. It's not about money, Vanessa. Then what? Pride? I made a business decision. Now I'm making one good luck with the relaunch. I hung up and returned to painting. An hour later, Thomas called. Vanessa was in the kitchen watching cooks prepare my dishes, making notes, asking detailed questions. 2 days before relaunch, I was at the farmer's market when Harold, the original owner, approached me while I examined tomatoes. Heard what happened? Also heard you're opening your own place. News travels fast in the restaurant world. Vanessa called yesterday, asked if I had notes or records of your cooking from the start, sounded desperate. I raised an eyebrow. What'd you say? That your food was always magic to me. I never knew how you did it. He held a tomato thoughtfully. She's in trouble. Investors expect the same restaurant you built. That afternoon, Ellie texted, they're trying to reverse engineer your olive oil cake 5th attempt. Still not right. I smiled. That cake took me 2 years to perfect the night before relaunch. Vanessa showed up at my apartment. Surprised, I let her in. One last offer, she said bluntly. Come back full creative control, 20% ownership stake. I leaned against the counter. Why? Practice Run was a disaster. Reservations next month built on your reputation. I miscalculated. For a moment, I considered it. 20% was significant. But then I thought of my grandfather's empty restaurant and cooking on my own terms. I appreciate the offer, but I've started something new. Her expression hardened. If you're opening a competing restaurant, your contract has a non-compete clause. You can't open within 5 miles of Briar Loft for 2 years. I hadn't checked. Good to know, I said. Opening the door, good luck tomorrow. After she left, I called my cousin Anthony, a business lawyer. The non-compete was real and enforceable. My new spot was only 2 miles from Briarloft. I'd hit an unexpected wall that night. Unable to sleep, I reviewed options. Delay opening, relocate, fight it in court. None felt right. At 3 a.m., I drove to my grandfather's building and sat in the half-renovated space, thinking. The next morning, on relaunch day, I met Anthony at his office. He furrowed his brow, reviewing the contract. There might be a loophole, he said finally. The non-compete bar's opening a similar restaurant concept with competing cuisine within 5 miles. What defines a similar concept? Your grandfather's was a traditional Italian place, right? Not new American like Briar Loft. I thought it over. My Briar Loft menu had Italian influences, but wasn't strictly traditional. I'd been planning something like that for the new place. My dishes, my style, but not tied to tradition. What if I went old school? I said slowly. Completely traditional. My grandfather's exact recipes, red checkered tablecloths, Chianti bottles with candles. Anthony nodded. That's different enough. We could argue it's not direct competition, risky, but possible. I thanked him, mind racing. I'd been so focused on recreating Briarloft I hadn't considered returning to my roots, the food that started it all. On the way home, Jason texted from Briarloft. Critics are here. Food's not right. Kevin's panicking. I didn't reply. Not my problem anymore. That evening, Thomas, Ellie, and Jason came over after their shift, faces grim. It was a bloodbath, Thomas said, accepting the beer I offered. None of the signature dishes worked. The lamb was tough, the stew bland, the cake dense as a brick. Vanessa kept making excuses, Ellie added, blaming suppliers, kitchen equipment, anything but the obvious. Which is, I asked. They don't have you, Jason said simply. We talked late into the night about everything that had happened, how Kevin had tried to follow my written recipes but missed all the unspoken nuances, how the critics' disappointment had been clear on their faces, and how Vanessa had vanished into her office halfway through service. There's more, Thomas said quietly, even though we were alone in my apartment. I overheard Vanessa on the phone with someone, an investor, I think. Apparently, she leveraged everything she had to buy Briar Loft, expecting a quick flip for profit. Based on its reputation? I asked. He nodded. Which was built on your food. Ellie added, she's in trouble if the relaunch doesn't get good reviews, she might lose her backing. I should have felt satisfaction, but instead, a strange clarity settled in me. This was never about my cooking. It was always about money, using what I'd built to turn a profit. I'm opening my grandfather's place, I said, going back to traditional Italian, his recipes, his way. What about the non-compete? Thomas asked. I explained Anthony's take, a different concept, a different target audience. And honestly, if she wants to challenge me, let her try her restaurants about to face bigger problems. The next morning, the first reviews popped up online, brutal, just as expected. A pale imitation of its former self. One read, all style, no substance. The soul of Briar Loft has vanished. That afternoon, I signed a lease on a small storefront across from my grandfather's building, a simple cafe where I could cook while renovations on the main place continued. I called it Moretti's Table. No gimmicks, no concept, just food that mattered. On a hunch, I drove by Briar Loft that night. The parking lot was half empty, and a paper sign on the door read, "Limited menu tonight." The unraveling had begun 3 weeks later. Moretti's Table was ready to open. Nothing fancy, just 12 tables, white walls, and my grandfather's old copper pots hanging in the kitchen. I'd handwritten the menu. 5 appetizers, 5 entrees, 3 desserts. All his recipes, unchanged since he perfected them decades ago. I'd made sure permits, licenses, and all legalities were in order. Anthony had reviewed every document to protect us if Vanessa tried to stir trouble. So far, she'd been silent according to Thomas, who'd quit Briar Loft with Ellie and Jason. Vanessa was too busy scrambling to save her investment to care about me. The night before opening, my father called. We hadn't spoken much since I left architecture school 15 years earlier. Your mother told me about the new place, he said, voice older than I remembered. Opening tomorrow, using Nono's recipes. Everyone, I said, just like he made them. There was a long pause. I imagined he'd be prouder of this than another architect in the family. Something tightened in my chest. You should come sometime. Maybe I will, he said. Then he told me he'd kept my grandfather's real recipe book, the worn leather journal filled with secrets I'd never known, where he learned what each dish meant to him. It felt like he was right there in the kitchen with me. 2 days after opening, with no advertising beyond an Instagram post from Ellie, we had a line out the door. Word spread fast among Briar Loft regulars that I was cooking again. We served 40 covers that night with just the 4 of us. Me and Thomas in the kitchen, Ellie and Jason front of house. Every dish went out exactly as my grandfather would have made it. Simple, perfect, honest. A week later, Mrs. Carpenter, the Thursday lamb regular from Briar Loft, found us. She hugged me, tears in her eyes. I've been looking everywhere for you, she said. Nothing's been right since you left. That night, I added my grandfather's lamb to the menu just for her 2 weeks in. We were booked solid. Every night I'd hired 2 more cooks and another server. My father sent the recipe book, a tattered leather journal filled with my grandfather's culinary secrets, stories I'd never known. It felt like he was still with me. On our 1-month anniversary, I arrived early to find a manila envelope taped to the door. Inside was a formal letter from Vanessa's lawyer, accusing me of violating the non-compete agreement and threatening legal action. That afternoon, I showed it to Anthony over coffee. "Right on schedule," he said, scanning the letter. "I was wondering when this would happen. Can they shut us down?" He set the paper down. "They can try. But I've been building our case since we talked. I have documented proof that Moretti's Table is a traditional Italian restaurant based on your family recipes. Completely different from the new American cuisine at Breerloft. Different concept, different target audience, different price point. We're solid." "Better than solid," he added. "Their argument's weak, especially since Breerloft changed its menu entirely." This was news to me. "They did?" "Yep," Anthony nodded. "Went full molecular gastronomy last week. Foams, gels, the works, chasing trends. They've basically admitted through their actions they're not the restaurant you built." I smiled. Perfect timing that evening. While prepping for service, a food critic from the Providence Journal walked in, the same one who wrote the scathing review of Breerloft's relaunch. He didn't realize I recognized him. I just cooked, sending out food that would have made my grandfather proud. The next morning, his review appeared. The heart of Breerloft didn't vanish. It simply moved across town and found its true home. By noon, our reservation list was full for the next 3 months. 6 months after opening Moretti's Table, Harold, the original Breerloft owner, called. "Have you seen it?" he asked without preamble. "Seen what?" "Breerloft's for sale. Vanessa's cutting her losses." I hadn't kept up. Hadn't thought about Breerloft in months, too busy running my own place, expanding the menu, training staff. "Asking price is half what she paid," Harold continued. "She's desperate for a quick sale." "Not my problem," I said, though something stirred. A feeling, not quite satisfaction, but a sense of things coming full circle. That afternoon, Anthony called. "Vanessa's dropping the lawsuit," he said. "Looks like she's got bigger problems, like selling a failing restaurant." "Exactly," I said. "Want to hear the best part? Her investors are suing her for misrepresentation, claiming she sold them a reputation that no longer exists." I thought about that while prepping dinner. The shortcuts Vanessa tried to take, how she only saw the surface of what made Breerloft special, never understanding its foundation. 3 days later, a black town car pulled up outside Moretti's during lunch service. Vanessa stepped out, straightened her jacket, and walked inside. The dining room went silent as the regulars recognized her. I stood by the kitchen pass, watching her take in the bustling dining room, the modest decor, the contented guests, the staff moving with smooth confidence. Our eyes locked across the room, expecting fury or bitterness. I was met instead with something like acceptance, maybe even a hint of respect. She gave a brief nod, then turned and left. That was the last time I saw her. A week later, Breerloft shut down permanently. The building sat empty for months, a silent testament to ambition lacking understanding. I felt no need to celebrate. The food had spoken for itself. 1 year after Moretti's Table opened, we expanded into my grandfather's original building. Next door, the renovations were finished. His old copper pot still hung proudly in the larger kitchen. The cafe remained a casual lunch spot, while the main dining room opened for dinner. On opening night, I lingered in the kitchen doorway watching families, couples, and loyal patrons who had followed me from Breerloft, alongside new faces drawn by word of mouth, fill the room. Thomas nudged me. "You just gonna stand there all night or get back to cooking?" I smiled and returned to the line midway through service. Ellie came in. "Someone's here to see you." There, in a corner booth, sat my father. He stood and offered a formal handshake, but I embraced him instead. "The place looks great," he said, surveying the space just as Nono would have. "A few modern touches," I replied, "but the soul remains." We shared his meal, The first genuine conversation in years, talking about my grandfather, about food and what it means to build something enduring. As he prepared to leave, he pressed something into my palm, a key to the vineyard in Campania. "Nono left this to me, but it belongs to you now," he said. "Maybe one day you'll make wine as good as your cooking." Later, alone at the bar, I sipped my grandfather's favorite vermouth. The dining room was dark except for the small light above. On the wall hung a framed Providence Journal review. The heart of Breerloff didn't disappear. It simply crossed town and found its true home. I hadn't set out to dismantle what Vanessa created. I only wished to build something genuine, something honest. In the end, that was enough. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply fulfilling your purpose and doing it well. I lifted my glass to my grandfather's memory and to the empty seats that would soon be filled again. This place was more than a restaurant. It was home.